this session. I see there's over 30 people have joined in locally, and I see some from overseas as well. And I think we have a mixture of researchers and people with an interest in the topic area. So that is excellent to see. Today's presentation will explain the overall research project that Stephen has mentioned and the origins of the project and so on. But this is where it's a little bit different from our previous seminars. Today, the presenters are at a very early stage of developing their plans for involvement, and they're looking for input from us to their plans going forward. They're looking for input and advice. We have a panel of 2 people, we'll introduce them later on, and also looking for input from very knowledgeable people that are in our audience today. So we have 3 presenters, and we'll introduce them shortly. They have 4 questions for you and for our panel, and they'll present those 4 questions early on. So maybe keep those questions in mind as the presentations go forward, and then we'll come back to the questions at the end and pose those questions to the panel and to the audience. Perhaps we'll wait until the presentation is over before beginning to answer the questions in the chat, just to concentrate on what's going on. So I'll start by introducing our first speaker, Dr Sadhbh Whelan. So Sadhbh is from the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, and joined the department in 2018 as the Child Protection Information Officer. And previously she had worked as an independent research consultant, but has also active time spent as a practitioner in frontline services in the area of child protection and homelessness, and then has worked in research again in the area relating to the needs of children and family and service provision, with a doctoral thesis on child protection and welfare reporting. So Sadhbh, well qualified to be in this area now, and I'll hand over to you for the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adele. Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen now, hopefully, and my slides. Now, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Marion. Okay, so as Adele said, my name is Sadhbh Whelan, and I'm in the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. Delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you all today about this new and exciting project that we've commenced in the department with Tusla as a key partner. So as Adele said, the working title at the moment is Research and Data Project Examining the Lives of Children in Care and Adults who are in Care as Children. Bit of a mouthful, so we're hoping to think of something a bit more snappy in the not too distant future. I'll also be joined in this presentation with 2 of my colleagues from Tusla, Marion Bratman, who's the National Manager for Research in Tusla's National Research Office, and William McNamara, who's the National Liaison Lead for Aftercare Services. So I'm just going to give you a bit of background information on this new project. Then William will give you an overview of Tusla services and specifically aftercare services. And then Marion will tell you about Tusla's involvement, Tusla's involvement with the PPI network and how the Tusla NRO is striving to embed PPI within its work presently. So as I've said, it's a new project, and as Adele said, we are at a very early stage. So we're using this seminar today to seek some advice from the response panel and also from yourselves in the audience about how we can incorporate a PPI approach within it. So as Adele also said, to that end, we have some questions which we'd like to pose to structure the discussion after our presentations. And I suppose from our perspective, to try and make the most of this great opportunity. So we thought it would be useful to ask the questions at the start, so you could have them in your minds as we talk through our presentations. So we've 4 questions that we thought we would pose to yourselves this morning, or this afternoon rather. So what are the best approaches to meaningfully involve young people and young adults into all elements of this research and data project? How do we get involvement right so that we can best gather the experiences of young people and young adults in the project? For example, those who choose not to avail of aftercare services and those who we define as hard to reach. How do we achieve ongoing engagement, involvement and participation with care experienced young people? And then I suppose an overarching question for us is, how is the patient component of the PPI definition translated into a social care research study? How can we translate the PPI terminology into definitions and terms that work best for this project? So there are questions, and they'll take on a bit more meaning, I suppose, as I tell you a bit about the project. So in 2009, the report of a major commission established to inquire into child abuse in industrial and reformatory schools was published, and that became known as the Ryan Report, and I'm sure it's familiar to many of you here. And from it, a number of recommendations were made. The key recommendation for us was one which stated that the HSC will, with their consent, conduct a longitudinal study to follow young people who leave care for 10 years to map their transition to adulthood. So at various times over the subsequent years, consideration was given by my department as to how best to address this recommendation, and various pieces of work were commissioned to consider the feasibility of longitudinal research, but no decisions had been made and the recommendation hadn't been actioned. Then in November 2020, a department and Tusla working group was established to consider how best to respond to that recommendation, and also importantly to take account of the developments that had taken place since the Ryan Report, particularly in relation to administrative data. So officials from the department and Tusla were nominated to participate, and you can see there on the right-hand side of the slide the list of all the people who participated in the group. So we did a good mix from both the department and also from Tusla. We met on 14 occasions, received a number of expert inputs and produced a number of outputs, such as a review of relevant literature. The group, within the group, we drew up terms of reference and agreed an aim of the group, which was to generate new knowledge about the lives, experiences and outcomes of children and young people in care and beyond, and the factors influencing those experiences through a combination of primary research and strengthened administrative data collection and analysis. We also agreed a number of key principles that underpin whatever approach the group decided to recommend at the end of its work. I just wanted to draw your attention to two of them in particular, given the context of this seminar. So we'd agreed that a principle should be children and young people's perspectives must be meaningfully captured, and also children and young people and stakeholders should have an input into the development of the project. So on the basis of all our considerations, we just wound up the group at the end of January, early February. So it stretched over a good 14, 15 months. The end of all that work, we agreed an approach and we presented a recommendation to the Minister, which was accepted and agreed, and also received cabinet approval on the 26th of January. And the project was launched then by the Minister the following day. So the approach that we have recommended and that we're working on now takes account of all developments which were already underway within the sector. Also takes key learnings from other data projects, and one in particular which I'll talk a little bit about shortly. And the overall intention of the approach is that this project will be dynamic, and the findings will influence policy and service provision as they emerge. And at its core, the agreed approach comprises 5 interrelated elements, which are phased and incremental, each one building on the previous one. So I'm just going to now give you a quick overview of the 5 elements to this research and data project. So that's the 5 elements there, and I'm going to talk through each one of them now. So the first one, responsibility for the project. And I suppose because we're still at such an early stage, this is still a key element of the project and one which we're working to bring to fruition. So it was agreed that responsibility for the project would reside within the department, with Tusla as a key partner, and importantly that we would draw heavily on Tusla's expert ICT and research input to guide the overall project and to also deliver on specific elements of the project. So we had a rationale for each of the different elements that encompass the approach that we decided on. So we needed obviously a structure in which to locate the study or the project. We didn't want it to get lost, for us to make recommendations, but there to be no structure to bring it to fruition. So we developed that. We also felt it was important for it to be within the department, because the department ultimately has oversight of the Ryan report recommendation, which is at the heart of this whole project. And then, as I said, it was essential to include expertise from Tusla ICT and research. So this element of the project is well underway. We've established a small project team within the department, also with input from Tusla, and the work has commenced to develop appropriate governance structures. There will be a steering committee, which will be officials from government bodies, government departments and public bodies, which will have strategic oversight. But I also wanted to mention that we're in the process of developing a stakeholder advisory group, which will comprise national experts, service providers and service users from the areas of alternative care and aftercare service provision and policy formation. And that group will provide input and advice on specific elements of the development of the project plan and its implementation. And I suppose it's the advisory group where we see the beginnings of the involvement by service users in the project. The second element then is continued support to strengthen systems data. So you may be aware, some of you in the audience may be aware, that Tusla has a national case management system, which is called the National Childcare Information System. And it's been operational across all of Tusla since 2018. And it stores data on all children placed in care across a wide range of different metrics. So within this project, we're going to put specific focused attention on developing the capacity of that system to track the individual pathways of children through the care system over time by designating dedicated funding and expertise to that specific aim. So at the moment, the NCC collects a lot of data on children in care, but it's cross-sectional and it's aggregate. So it's moment in time and it's aggregate. So we want to develop the system to look at pathways, which would give us a greater insight into the journey that children take through the care system. So our rationale for putting this piece of work, giving it a particular focus in the project, is that there have been significant IT developments since the Ryan report, which was, as I said, in 2009, which need to be capitalised upon. Also, the NCCIS is constantly developing, and the capability of the system is becoming even more sophisticated. And then, as I previously mentioned, another project which is currently being progressed by the department, Tusla and the CSO is an Education and Children in Care Pathfinder project, which is aiming to link children in care and education-based administrative data for the first time. So this is an exciting initiative which is hoped will serve as a proof of concept for other such data linking projects, which could inform an important source of information for this project. So in terms of what we're doing at the moment, we are ourselves in the department and key officials who are involved in the NCCIS are in conversations about how to begin to progress this element. The third element then is a study of those who left care 10 years ago. And this will be a once-off study of young people who left care approximately 10 years ago, which will collect primary research data from those respondents on key domains, and will also explore the possibilities for administrative data linkage. There's a number of reasons as to why we included this element in the project. It speaks to the Ryan report recommendation and will provide data and insights quickly to inform service delivery and policy developments, much more so than if we were to wait for a longitudinal study, which would take a long time to give us some real data. Also importantly, it speaks to the iterative nature of this project in that it'll provide important insights to guide the design of a longitudinal study with young people leaving care, which is the next element of the study, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Also, we acknowledge that aftercare services have developed significantly in the intervening years since the Ryan report, but at the same time, we believe that important insights can be gained from the cohort's experiences and opinions of when they left care. So planning for this research project is currently underway. Funding has been secured and a request for tender will be issued by the department soon for individuals or groups who would be interested in carrying it out. So the fourth element then, as I mentioned, is a longitudinal study of young people leaving care. And this, of course, responds directly to the Ryan Report recommendation and acknowledges that while we have a lot of data available on children in care, as I mentioned, there's much less on those using aftercare services. The first wave of data collection will also generate timely cross-sectional or moment-in-time data on the young person's experiences. And we chose 16 as the age to start the longitudinal study because we think it is a critical juncture in a young person's life as they transition to adulthood. And for a lot of young people, aftercare planning begins at that stage. So it will be a time before this element of the project commences, but as previously mentioned, planning will be greatly influenced by the outcome of the previous element. And finally, then, we're also, the fifth element is that we would carry out bespoke research on children in care and aftercare to complement improved system data and the other research and data initiatives. But importantly, such bespoke research will facilitate insights into the experiences of children in care, because we'll be getting those insights from young people in aftercare from the longitudinal study. So that is a whistle-stop tour through the new project that we have commenced. Thanks for listening to me, and I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague, William.
Thank you, Sadhbh. Hello, everybody. I go straight into this. So within the Tusla remit, which is under the Child and Family Act 2013, the agency is charged with supporting and promoting the development and welfare and protection of children and the effective functioning of families. It offers care and protection for children in circumstances where their parents have not been able to or unlikely to provide the care that child needs. Responsibility for ensuring that every child in the state attends school or otherwise receives an education and are providing education welfare services to support and monitor children's attendance, participation and retention in education. It ensures that the best interests of the child guide all decisions affecting children, individual children. Strengthening interagency cooperation to ensure seamless services responsive to needs. Commissioning services relating to the provision of child and family services. Undertaking research relating to its functions, providing information and advice to the Minister regarding those functions. Consulting children and young people so that they help shape the agency's policies and services. The services themselves then include a range of universal and targeted services under Child and Protection and Welfare Services, Education and Welfare Support Services, Psychological Services, Alternative Care, which includes the aftercare service support provision, family and locally based community supports, such as family resource centres, early years services, domestic, sexual and gender-based violence services. The context of this data project, Children in Care, as I've said, the project is commencing 16, so we have 5,863 children in care at the end of the most recent performance reports at Q4 2021. 90%, 5,266 of children in care were in foster care, both general and relative. 8%, 459 were in residential, both general and special care placements. Moving to aftercare, under the same period of reporting, with 3,059 young persons, adults in receipt of aftercare services. 53%, 1,618 of those in receipt of an aftercare service were 18 to 20 years inclusive. 24%, 721 of those in receipt of an aftercare service were 21 to 22 years inclusive. Tusla aftercare then, aftercare services, they're relatively in their infancy and has developed over a period of years to a service that has strengthened the capacity to provide support for young people leaving care and young adults in receipt of aftercare who are eligible. Coinciding with the aftercare being placed on a statutory footing on the 1st of September 2017, an agreed framework for delivery has been established in each local operational area. Aftercare support services operates on a transitional model, which builds on and on the supports and work already undertaken by many foster carers, social workers, residential care workers in preparation for young people for adulthood. Just want to talk a little bit about the dedicated aftercare support services, which I refer to at the moment, that we rolled out under that model. At the moment, we have 20 dedicated aftercare services across 18 operational areas within Tusla. That includes the Separated Children Seeking International Protection aftercare team. We have 150 dedicated aftercare staff. We've commissioned aftercare service providers with Tusla oversight. Referrals to aftercare service is at 16, commences at 16, but can come in somewhat later, but that's within the policy and the legislation that we look for. As Sadhbh says, this project is from the 16 years upwards as well. 523 referrals in 2021. Notably, that's a 20.6% decrease from the same period, 137 from 2020. There are 500 approximately young people that leave children care, that leave care each year. There's 26 local aftercare interagency steering committees in operation, which is an important element of aftercare service provision, because that's the interagency support in terms of a collaborated identification of need and planning. There's 21 physical drop-in clinics in operation. Aftercare has specific ceilings in terms of delivery under the legislation, but there's no age ceiling on drop-in centres that can be accessed at any time, both by young people who have a care experience and of all stakeholders, including foster carers. We have 25 local aftercare forums established, and that's from the age range of 18 to 25. I'll touch on the importance of that later. Just to put it, some of aftercare service in development, I mentioned that it's relatively in its infancy. We've come a long way, but we have a lot more to do. We have some useful comparisons here, I think, which would be helpful to look at. In 2008, we had 7 developmental workers, which were in effect aftercare workers, but that was their working title. In 2010, following the Ryan report, 1 million in state funding was allocated to develop an aftercare service. So following that in 2011, the development of the first national aftercare policy. In 2012, there was 1,341 care leavers in receipt of an aftercare service in that March, Q1. Just to bring your attention, that was the age range of 18 to 23 inclusive. I'll mention why that is important later. 2014, this was the commencement of the Tusla performance activity reports and the data collection across Tusla. In 2014, there was 33 dedicated aftercare workers at that time. 2014, we had 2 local aftercare interagency steering committees in operation. 2014, that should be 14, sorry, typo there. There was 0 aftercare forums, 18 to 25 years. Sorry, 2012, there was 0, that's correct actually. So 2014, we had 4 aftercare forums in 2014, moving on from 0 in 2012 and before. 2017, just in the context of the commencement of the Child Care Amendment Act 2015, we had 1,996 in Q2 young people in young adults availing of aftercare service. The policy was revised during this time in preparation for the commencement of the Act and the strengthening of aftercare support. In 2021, today, we have 3,000, as I said, and 59 young people in Q4 availing of aftercare services. That's an increase of 1,063, 53.26%. I'll hand over to Marion now.
Thanks, William. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Marion, you can.
Thanks. Apologies, I'm having technical difficulties today, so I'm not leaving my camera off on purpose. It just has not worked for me today. So I'm here to sort of bookend the presentation part of today and provide some context in relation to where the department's research and data project, the National Research Office in Tusla, and our partnership with the PPI Ignite Network interact in order for us to, I suppose, strengthen our own knowledge and learning around public and patient involvement in research. So just quickly, in terms of Tusla's work, again, just going back to some of the legislation and policy and practice, there is a very strong focus within the agency on participation of service users, particularly children and young people. And as William has stated, in terms of the Child and Family Agency Act, there is particular clauses in the Act in relation to consultation and research with children and young people. We are informed by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have government policy and strategy in relation to participation of young people in decision making, and Tusla has its own child and youth participation strategy 2019 to 2023. We also have 2 national approaches to practice, the science of safety model and METAL, which include quite strong provisions around co-production of plans and involving service users within the development of their own service, and that is being embedded. And we have very strong and growing service user experience and participation fora within the agency, and there's TAG is an example there, but also within William's area there's a lot of fora that are available, as noted, which are there to hear and ascertain and capture the voice and the experience of service users. And we also have partners with other stakeholders like EPIC. So all of that environment and infrastructure is to try and draw on that wider concepts of participation. And we use the Lundy model, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, to try and model the best practices in this area, both for individual input into service, but also for collective input into decision making. So that is the wider context for Tusla. And I think the research office then was trying to identify the best ways that we could mirror that participation approach in the wider agency and wider government policy, but also developed more of this concept of PPI in research. So we were undertaking some of our own work within the office and having that sort of high on our agenda in terms of research involving service users. But then the opportunity came to engage with the PPI network funded by the HRB. And that really has strengthened our work within the research office, and in terms of learning and sharing and building on kind of the knowledge that is emerging through the network itself. So I won't go into great detail of the network, just to say that Tusla is a national partner with the network alongside a number of HEIs on an all-island basis. But I think it's interesting to look at the objectives of the network. So it's to further improve the quality of PPI approaches in health and social care research. And I think that emphasis in social care research is why we're sort of here today, to try and understand more of how PPI can be strengthened in social care research. And promote partnerships that are seen as meaningful by both researchers and PPI contributors, to embed PPI at institutional level and the national research ecosystem. So again, I think that is where Tusla NRO sees itself as part of that research ecosystem, but also in a really interesting place and kind of positioned between practice and policy and research within a kind of a service delivery organization like Tusla, to create a nationally coordinated and internationally recognized network of excellence, to create a shared national voice for PPI within an identity of independent of any one institution, and that will serve all, and to improve people's health and to enhance healthcare delivery through engaged research. And I think that's really important for today in terms of how we do that in terms of this particular project and through this partnership. And just give you the link to the website there. Thanks, Sadhbh. So just to say, you know, we have adopted a definition of PPI in research, and we have included both the idea of public and patient in the context that we're saying that means everyone who has an interaction with a Tusla service, children and young people, those attending services, including potential users of services, and including parents, carers, guardians, staff members, or anyone involved in the care and protection of children and young people. So it's quite a broad net there. Like, we're not just saying it is a children and young person's experience, but very importantly, you know, we want to promote research that involves children and young people, both in research participants, but also in their involvement in the research cycle. And that notion of patient, I think Sadhbh has noted that in one of her questions. And then involvement, we mean active involvement between children and young people who use services and the general public and researchers. So again, not as research participants or subjects, but more in terms of involving in the research cycle itself. So how we, I suppose, have delivered this in practice is that we have a particular question in our research ethics application form, which speaks to how PPI is being thought about by researchers, and kind of knowing that, like, you know, there's probably a continuum there in terms of people's understanding, skills, knowledge and competence around PPI, which we're learning as well, but also to get people thinking about how it can be done and what could be achieved. And, you know, we're building on our own work programs within the agency as well. So we are, you know, we have a particular study, the child research study, looking at the experience of child protection and welfare. And we did some elements of consultation with children and young people to inform the tender for that. We have a PPI approach in the Research Ethics Committee application as stated, and then we have membership of our independent REC that have public contributors, and that's really meaningful because they are bringing that kind of public patient impact of the research on the lived experience of people who are impacted by a particular service, policy or practice, that lens through the research ethics process. We record annual metrics, so we're beginning to see how many of our research studies are involving children and young people. That's our starting point, and we're looking at maybe a metric around PPI. And here is where we land on today. So as part of, I suppose, our partnership in promoting PPI, you know, we're working with the department and trying to understand that principle, or those principles that Sadhbh noted, around engagement and involvement and hearing the voice of the young person as in the project, and how we do that really well. So that's where we land now today, and I think that's where we get some feedback from the panel and from the audience in terms of what they've heard and how they think we can do that well. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much to Sadhbh and William and Marion. And I think it's a fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. I think we often have researchers presenting, and one of the things they really struggle with is, having done good research, how to influence policy and practice. So here we had first the policy voice coming talking to us today, and then the people who deliver the service. So the idea of doing dynamic, having a research project that's dynamic and influences policy as the things emerge is really interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our first panel member, Roisin Farragher, who's going to introduce herself and give some thoughts, Roisin, on the presentation, and particularly to remind ourselves of the 4 questions. What are the best approaches to meaningful involvement here? How do we get involvement right, especially those who don't use aftercare or they're hard to reach? And how can we keep this going over the entire duration of the of this project, which obviously has a number of components, and then the question about language. So Roisin, over to you, and introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Edel, and thanks, Sadhbh, William and Marion as well for that really interesting piece. I am Dr. Roisin Farher. I'm in NUI Galway as well. I am a care experienced young person, so I went into care ironically around the time of the Ryan report when it had just come out in 2009. So it's a little bit special for me to be sitting here giving feedback on this. So thank you, Edel and Stephen, for this opportunity. I welcome it. I'll start by saying this, that I welcome this report. I welcome the research that is going into these different kind of sections within this. I think it's really good to see people looking at post-aftercare as well, and those outcomes for young people and what might happen. However, I do feel that sometimes the pre-care piece is missing, and that's something around the outcomes we need to look at. The other thing I think that's really important here is we have to get this right from the outset. And the language around this is so important. So even using terms like that this will get the complete data set for Tusla and so on, and it'll do figures. This is young people's lives, you know, this is decisions around them. So one of the questions there is about how can we best involve? Involvement is a right within this for these young people. That's as clear and all as it is. And for the stakeholders that are involved in this also. So I think we should give priorities to outcomes, but that are defined by the young people themselves. So for young people, an outcome might be to complete their education and so on. For another young people, it might be go on to third level and so on. It might be simply to survive the care system. So I think we need to be careful when we talk about outcomes and so on, and how much involvement those young people have in deciding what a positive outcome is for them. I think that steering group or steering committee that you talked about there, Sadhbh, at the start was very interesting in terms of possibly having young people with care experience on that group to set the questions, and, you know, from different stakeholders as well. Foster care is included, you know, some birth parents and so on in different ways. I think you can be inclusive there. I also think the questions we pose are really important for those young people. Like I was saying, they're asking young people what they think a positive outcome is of the care system, is how we get improvement from seeing it from their perspectives. Because again, we can have very different, I suppose, ideas about what outcomes are and what positive outcomes to the young people are. And also the other side of outcomes is there's a lot of soft outcomes that come from young people as well, in terms of if you're thinking of something like developing a kind of a pyramid of need, kind of like Maslow hierarchy, but in terms of the care system and what could be appropriate for young people there in terms of the soft outcomes, because a lot of the time they're left out. And simply that could be having a better relationship with birth families after the care system. Could be as small as that, but that would mean real impact and change for the young people. So the other one that I wanted to kind of focus on was that language around how can we translate the PPI terminology? Well, I think it's about participant involvement straight away. So we might need to reshift the public patient piece just for this particular study, but it is about participant involvement. And it's also used in terms like care experienced rather than care leaver. It's, you know, using these practical pieces of what would suit, and it's about privileging their voices. These young people have voices, so we don't need to go out and try and find them. You know, these are just undiscovered voices. So when you talk about hard to reach, there's always a means of reaching these young people, you know, it's just about being undiscovered in that piece itself. So I think we need to be careful around that kind of terminology. This is about privileging their voices and trying to raise them as well.
Thank you so much, Roisin. It's so strong hearing somebody who's a care experienced person talking with such sincerity, I suppose, about the work that's going on, and that probably positions everything about today in the right place, that it's about asking people with experience how to guide and shape the work that you're going to do. So we have a second panel member, Michael Foley, but what I'm going to do is, before going over to Michael, I'd invite people in the audience maybe to begin to contribute to the discussion. So maybe if we think about the first question, the broad question question about what are the best approaches to meaningfully involving young people and young adults in the various different elements of this research and data project. If you have some thoughts on that, you might like to add them to the chat, or if you raise your hand, I think we'll be able to see you raising your hand, and we can invite you in to speak. And the second question then is, and again, I hear what you're saying, Roisin, how do we get the involvement right? So I think the people who don't use the aftercare service is interesting. So I think William said there was approximately 500 leavers per year. So we're trying to get people who left in 2012. So how do you reach those that don't use the service? But then also, how do we make sure that we capture and involve the people who may not be immediately at the table? So maybe if we could invite you to think about those and share some thoughts. Michael, we might call you in now to give your response while we're getting some input elsewhere. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much, Adele. And I think always in things like this, it's always important to amplify the voices of people with the lived experience. So I'd love to just repeat everything that Roisin has just said, because I think that it's hugely important, and that it is that thing about bringing people's lived experience to the table. It reminds everybody at the table that, yes, they do have to consider things in aggregate. They do have to, do logistics work and organize things for large groups. But ultimately, every single person, this is an incredibly meaningful part of their lives. And that's why what we call PPI, which is about bringing that lived experience to the table, is so incredibly important. I do a lot of work with people with intellectual disabilities, and sometimes they would say to me, but I wouldn't know what to say at the table. And I said, the fact that you are sitting at the table is important. Even if you say nothing at all, that it's important that you're at the table, because you are there reminding them about how important every single data point is. Every single data point is something that you've carved out of your life and you're sharing for the greater good. And that's hugely important. And it changes everybody else. It changes the rules. It changes the goalposts. And it really then brings it back to that idea of, why are we doing this? What is the point if it's not for people who have an experience of care? What is our purpose otherwise, if it's not to actually make the lives of people better? And that even by sitting at the table, if you don't say anything. Now, having said that, when they do sit at the table, then they're confident enough to have loads to say, which is brilliant, because we've taken the pressure off them to be smart or to be clever or to be whatever. They can come and be themselves and speak of their what is their specialist area of expertise, which is themselves and their lives. And I think that is hugely, hugely important in stuff like this. I'd also, I suppose, having worked with Marion and yourself, Adele, and Adele Tierney on the Tusla activity to try and bring people into the ethical review process, I would say that Tusla has really got a lot of bona fides in this area and are really walking the talk as well. So they are really very sincere in terms of how they're including those voices, how they're stitching them in, and also how they are making sure that people are being treated with respect, and that they're, that obviously some of the discussions we had, and Adele, you have remembered this, that we were talking about things like re-traumatization and things like that, issues that we needed all to be mindful of, and we needed to have thought about in advance before we did things. But then actually when those things then kick into action, when those processes kick into action, that there is the required preparatory work there so that people feel welcome, that they feel supported, and that feel confident to be able to do what it is they need to do. I suppose it's always that thing that anytime we bring people into a process, we're always trying to figure out what are they asking in their own heads about us. And I always think that what they're asking is, do I trust you? So do I know why I'm here and what you want from me and what your expectation of me is and what it is you're planning to do with whatever it is I give you. Do I trust you in that way? Am I in the right place? Do I belong here? So in other words, you know, do I have something to contribute? Do people make me feel welcome? All that kind of stuff about, do I belong? Do I feel like I belong? Then I suppose it's that thing about, do I like spending time with you? So in other words, it doesn't mean do I like you, but do I actually really like the fact that I'm doing this with you? You know, do you make me feel like I'm actually doing something that's going to make a difference? Do I feel like you're really listening to me? Do I feel like you know who I am and that you can see me? And then the last bit is there something going on for me that you haven't a clue about? Is there some barrier? So in other words, the fact that it takes me 3 buses to get to the venue that you've decided, am I coming onto your territory and that's not good territory for me? You know, all these kinds of things that we don't know about what's going on in everybody's lives. And I think after 2 years of the pandemic, none of us knows what other people are going through. None of us even knows whether somebody is actually dandering a child on their knee while on a Zoom call. I'm not at the moment now, I have to say. But it's that idea that we really don't know what's going on in other people's lives. And so we have to start with that relationship. We can do plans in advance. And it's always that thing I always think is really interesting with one of the questions is about, you know, how do we get it right? And what's the best thing that we can do? And I think the reality is that with all PPI work, it is an iterative process. We do all of our preparatory work. We make sure that we have everything ready in advance, but then we start the relationship and we adapt. You know, that's what we do as humans. It's a bit like saying, you know, if you were going to get married, it's kind of, you know, well, I have a husband or a wife-shaped hole in my life that I suddenly want to fill, kind of thing. That's not how that works. The marriage is the start. It's not the end of the process. You learn and you grow and you shape and you do that. And PPI relationships are not a marriage, I have to say, but they are an opportunity to form something new together, rather than for you to say, right, well, we have this cookie cutter version of what we want our PPI contributors to be. And you then need to slot into that. And as somebody who's experienced care, well, we really only want the people who are very compliant. We don't want the people who've had a lousy experience and really have a lot of issues to deal with around the care experience. Like, that's not going to work. You start by creating the space and then you build a relationship, and that works across PPI, I think, a lot of the time. And it's really good and it's really enriching, and it really can change the lives of civil servants, of public servants, of people in services, and people who use services and have experience of care. And I'd love to bring you back in, Roisin, because I think this is a good opportunity for you to talk about that side of it.
Yeah, and I was just going to come in anyway. I don't know if you saw my piece or not. Thanks, Michael. I suppose there was one thing there, and I think this is such an opportunity for the department, for Tusla, for everyone in this area to get it right this time about what we want the standard of care to be within the care system. We know, and we can argue about prevention and everything else, but unfortunately for some young people, we have to have a care system. And I don't think young people will disagree with that. A lot of young people that I've interviewed in the past will say, look, I understand I had to go into care, but it was all these other things happening and people making decisions on my behalf. And I was just sat there and I felt powerless. And now I'm annoyed at the system. And now there's a lack of stigma. And now I won't tell people that I'm in care. And now I distrust the system. Now I don't want to engage because I've been let down by people before, and so on. So there's like this reaction to the reaction of young people being in care, and it's what happens after. So there's a whole thing there about reshaping and redefining what we want from a care system. And I think this is the best way in which, like, this is the biggest research piece we've done in years to really redefine that and say, this is what we need to do, and so on. And are we aiming for the best care system that we can possibly have? And I also think this issue of budget and resources and everything, this is an old excuse. So, like, again, to go back to Michael's point of, this should not be dictating what we want from the research. The young people should be doing this. Like, if we were talking about real involvement and real participant voices and really hearing them and meaningful change and so on, but managing the expectation also. lots of young people I've been involved with in the research will never be upset when they know the expectation of how long a policy might take to change or where their voices will go. They're upset when they don't hear about dissemination, when they don't actually know where results have gone and they haven't been contacted after, or they've given their life story and somebody goes, thanks, goodbye, good luck now, and no thank you card or nothing after, and they've just shared this and they're left there in a space. So, you know, there's no follow-up with them. So I think we need to look at our research ethics and how we actually ethically mind participant involvement as well, follow up, you know what I mean, and how we do that properly and appropriately for different age groups and so on, and what we can do. But again, to go back to that constraint issue of budget and resources dictating, no, ethically we should be looking what care is and directing that onto, well, what do we think young people need? Is that what they're telling us? And can we even go one better than what they're asking for?
Yeah, excellent, Roisin and Michael, thank you very much for your contributions as well. I might just pick up on some of the points that have come in the chat, because there's some interesting points there. So Luca May is suggesting some really good thoughts that, you know, that the involvement should be co-produced by the people that you are involving. Now, again, you need to have some idea, like Michael is saying at the start, you know, to explain to people what you're trying to do, but to co-produce the involvement is one recommendation. And a number of people have commented on the right language is key, and we've already had the care experienced from Roisin. I would be interested if there's anybody in the audience who has done involvement in social care. Just let us know what language you use, you know, in terms of when you're describing your involvement. I think that would be interesting. But the proper language and things like hard to reach and so on is really important. Yeah, that's coming through in a number of ways. Sadhbh, is there any question in particular that you would like to follow up with?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think what's been said so far has been really useful. You know, we are at a very early stage. We are really sort of blank pages in ways. You know, we're eager to learn. We really do want to involve people in a meaningful way. I think what you said there about involvement should be co-produced by involving the people you are striving to involve. So, I mean, that's definitely a key message I'll be taking away from this. Yeah, we have to give it a lot of thought, and I think we have to have a lot of conversations, you know, with people who can guide us. You know, particularly, if I hope you don't mind saying, particularly with Roisin, and myself and Roisin have already connected, and we're going to have a chat next week. So, I mean, that's very much our approach. It's we want guidance. We want, you know, we want to learn. As Marion had said, there is quite a bit of experience and knowledge within the NRO in Tusla already. So from the department's perspective, we're pulling that in as much as possible. And, you know, we're using the practice, research, ICT experience within the department as much as possible. It's very much a partnership approach. But I think that the third leg to the stool, if you will, is the young people themselves who've experienced care, and that's what we're, you know, that's what we're thinking about, and we're starting to attempt to do.
Yeah.
So we're taking our first shaky steps, but you know, we're committed. So yeah.
And
I'm glad, Sadhbh, as well, sorry, Del, that you're seeing this as involvement as a right, you know, of these young people. You know, lots of decisions are made on young people's behalf, even being taken into care, so they don't even have a decision on that, or their placement or other things. So I'm glad that the involvement. And I also think it goes further than co-producing knowledge. This is about co-designing the study, co-producing and then co-disseminating. Because lots of young people, again, are left at that part where they've given their story, they've shared the story, and it probably happens in other PPI research as well. And then it is very much, okay, well, where is that gone? You know what I mean?
No, we definitely don't want that. And you know, I hear people saying hard to reach is maybe not the correct terminology, but I mean, even for us to get in touch with people, we need to involve people who know people. You know, it's going to be a little bit of that as well. So that's going to be very important as we try to bring people into the study even.
Mm.
So yeah.
And I think that comes from the insider perspective. I mean, it's like, you know, in a way of how do you create a sense of community? Okay, you've shared values and beliefs, and a lot of young people would feel a connection already to somebody else who has the same experience to them. So I think there's something about that insider piece as well.
Yeah, excellent. Sorry, now, Michael, before you come in, if I just pick up on one other point, and then we'll give you the last word, from Rachel Stemp, who is working on currently setting up a group for foster carers, underserved in research. And after much deliberation, the name they settled on was Include capital M, capital E, where the ME stands for my experience. So you can have a look at the chat there. That sounds like a really good solution to that. Thanks, Rachel, for sharing. So, Michael, we have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, so just to say that longitudinal studies can be hard because they lose people along the way. Your PPI contributors can play a really meaningful role in keeping people engaged and involved through that. But you have to make sure that your PPI contributors are not just a sock puppet for what it is you want to do, that they are actually, that they really have a role in that and really have a role in shaping those experiences that keep people involved in the longitudinal study. I'd certainly suggest, I've been involved with a longitudinal study here for a number of years for people with intellectual disabilities, but I would certainly suggest that you look at that in the context of how to bake that in from the very beginning. And I will finish by quoting Virginia Minogue in the HSE, and she always says about hard to reach, she said, how can you say we're hard to reach? We're standing right behind you in the supermarket. And I think that that's a really useful way to stop us from talking about hard to reach. They are there. It's about finding ways of getting to them in some way. And then once you find, as you said, Roisin, once you find a way in as an insider, then that insider leads to other insiders, because there's a real kind of sense of community among people, and that's how you reach those. But sometimes you have to find a way in, and a way in is a PPI contributor.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. And I think that's a lovely way to finish up. We'll all be looking at who's in the queue behind us this evening in the supermarket. So just say a thank you to all three speakers for presenting today and setting the context. As I say, a very different presentation than we're used to, a different context. Huge thanks to Roisin Farragher and to Michael Foley for their comments and feedbacks and reflections, and to everybody for joining. I'm particularly glad to see people from Tusla, from other services, some people from Wales, from England, and researchers from around who are working in this area. So I've learned a lot. I hope we've all learned today, and I think Sadhbh, William and Marion have certainly a lot of food for thought. So go forth and involve, and PPI Ignite Network will be right beside you and really interested in supporting and helping in whatever way we can. So thanks very much to everybody who has contributed today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adele. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much.